I pushed the front door open, and it groaned like an old hinge, stopping me dead in my tracks as a wave of flat beer stench and thumping bass slammed into me, vibrating through the apartment like the heartbeat of a headache I'd barely outrun. I just clawed my way through a brutal 14-hour night shift, my bones aching from the grind. But stepping into this chaos was a punch I hadn't braced for. Iris and I had tied the knot 2 years back, starting out with hushed vows over greasy takeout boxes. But the past 7 months had twisted that sweetness into something sharp and unfamiliar, like a song gone off-key. Her wild spirit and stubborn need to live free as a bird had been wearing me down, constantly poking at my limits, shrugging off my quiet begs for some basic consideration, and turning our life together into a carousel for her random impulses. Then came that night, the one that finally cracked something deep inside me, a break I couldn't unfeel. I trudged inside, my boots crunching over a pile of scattered tortilla chips, my weary eyes taking in the chaos. Empty cups tipped over by the coffee table, sticky spills shining on the hardwood, and a half-eaten pizza slumped face down on the rug like the sad remains of a late-night mess. The living room hummed with a playlist Iris had obviously started hours ago, loud enough to rattle the windows, while two of her friends, people I'd never met, lounged across the couch, dozing under a pile of messy blankets, one with mascara smudged down her cheek like she'd been up too late. I just stood there, work bag still hanging off my shoulder, jaw locked tight, staring at the mess. Another round of Iris's chaos. No heads-up text, no warning, not even a half-hearted attempt to hide the wreckage. This wasn't her first time turning our place into the aftermath of a college party. I'd stumbled into this kind of scene twice before, choking down my irritation with a weak, "We'll deal with it tomorrow." But this time it hit different. Like she'd quit pretending I even registered on her radar. Like I was some outsider in the home I busted my tail to keep afloat. I let my bag drop by the door, the thud swallowed up by the blaring music, and grumbled under my breath, "You've got to be joking." Stepping over a crushed beer can, I eased the bedroom door open and saw Iris flung across the bed, one arm draped over her face, still rocking last night's sparkly top that shimmered faintly in the dim light. I cleared my throat, loud enough to cut through the noise, but she didn't budge, so I leaned in close and gave her shoulder a firm shake. I gave Iris another shake and said, "Hey, Iris, get up. We've got stuff to hash out." She let out a groggy moan, sliding her arm off her face to peer at me through a haze of smudged eyeliner, her voice all thick and grumpy as she mumbled, "What's it now, Christopher?" She propped herself up, rubbing her temples like the world was too loud, and shot me a look. "What's your problem?" "My problem?" I swung my arm toward the living room, where the mess still ruled supreme, and said, "I dragged myself home after a night shift, and this is what greets me. Care to explain what went down here?" Iris just rolled her eyes, flopping back onto the pillow for a beat before hauling herself upright again, muttering, "It was just a girl's night. Chill out. You're blowing this way out of proportion." My tone sharpened, though I kept it under control, and I replied, "A girl's night, huh? Iris, I'm the one shelling out rent to keep this roof over us. I figure I've earned a heads up when our place is about to look like a bomb went off. If something breaks or worse, guess who's on the hook? Me, that's how it goes." She bolted upright, her bare feet smacking the floor, and snapped back. "Oh, here comes the rent lecture again. This is my home too, Christopher, and I don't need your approval to enjoy myself. I'll throw a party whenever I feel like it, so get over it." Her words cut deep, hurled like little jabs, and she folded her arms, practically daring me to argue. I stared at her, my exhaustion slugging it out with a slow simmer of anger bubbling up inside. I sucked in a deep breath, spun around, and stomped back to the living room. Her two pals were still crashed out on the couch, one snoring softly like she didn't have a care in the world. I crouched down next to them, keeping my voice calm but solid, and said, "Hey, ladies, time to rise and shine." I tugged the blanket off the closer one, who grumbled as she stirred, and added, "Sorry to cut your snooze short, but you all had a big night. I'd really appreciate it if you could pitch in and help Iris tidy up before you roll out." From the bedroom doorway, Iris's voice erupted like a thunderclap. "Christopher, are you for real? Don't humiliate me like this." She charged in, her hair a tangled wreck, fists balled up tight, and barked, Let them head home. I'll just call a cleaning crew. Quit playing the control freak. Her friends blinked awake, swapping uneasy looks as the room got heavy with tension. My jaw locked so tight my teeth started to ache, but I held it together, just barely. I straightened up, planting my hands on my hips, and stared at the ceiling for a second, counting in my head to keep from losing it. Finally, I let out a low, strained, "Fine. Iris, do whatever you want. You always do anyway." The front door clicked shut behind her friends as they shuffled out, their awkward goodbyes drifting off down the hall. Iris, still decked out in her wrinkled party gear, plopped onto the couch and yanked out her phone, her fingers jabbing at the screen with a bored look plastered on her face. "There," she said, not bothering to glance up. "Cleaning service is booked, problem fixed. Happy now?" I stood there, surrounded by the disaster of crushed tortilla chips and tacky bottles, pinching the bridge of my nose to keep my head from exploding. "Iris, those cleaners don't come cheap. We can't just fling cash at every mess you leave behind like it's no big deal." She shrugged, scrolling through her phone like she couldn't care less, and muttered, "I'm not scrubbing it myself, way too wiped out. Besides, it's not some huge issue." My voice climbed, cracking under the weight of my frustration as I shot back. "Not a big deal? I'm the only one bringing in money here. You haven't had a job for 7 months. I'm not throwing that in your face to be mean. I'm saying we've got to watch our pennies. I'm killing myself on night shifts to keep us going, and you're treating it like pocket change." Iris chucked her phone onto the cushion and fixed me with a hard stare, snapping, "Oh, spare me the penny pincher routine, Christopher. I'm not your little girl, so quit preaching at me." I sucked in a deep breath, my hands curling into fists at my sides, and said, "I'm not preaching. I'm just asking you to clue me in on stuff like this. Parties, hiring cleaners, whatever, just give my thoughts a second's worth of air. That's all I want." She folded her arms, leaning back with a smug little grin that dared me to keep going, and fired back. "I don't need your okay to live how I want. This is my place too. I can do whatever pops into my head, like inviting whoever I feel like, even my ex if the mood strikes." The room went dead quiet. My eyes popped wide, then squinted tight, heat rushing to my face as I boomed, "Your ex? Are you kidding me right now?" My voice broke loose from its careful cage, loud and raw. "You don't get to toss that at me, Iris. That's straight up disrespectful, and you know it. Dragging Max into this? That's a cheap, nasty move, and frankly, it's crossing a line. I'm the one paying the rent, keeping this roof over us while you've been jobless for months. How about a little appreciation? Or at least some basic manners?" Iris didn't even blink. She leaned forward, her smirk turning icy and sharp, and said, "Oh, I contribute plenty, Christopher. I keep this place warm and lively. You're welcome." The sarcasm dangled heavy in the air, laughable against the backdrop of the pizza-smeared rug and toppled furniture. She shot to her feet, brushing past me with a huff, muttering just loud enough for me to catch, "I'll do whatever I darn well please." I stood there, chest heaving, watching her storm off, her words dropping into me like rocks sinking to the bottom of a lake. The room seemed to shrink around me, the clutter screaming louder in my ears, and for the first time, I started wondering if this was a battle I could even come out on top of. For days after that, the house buzzed with a heavy, unspoken strain. Iris and I hardly swapped a word. I simmered in a quiet rage, stewing over everything, while she pranced around with this bold, untouchable attitude, like nothing could faze her. That silence wasn't calm, it was a ticking time bomb, just waiting for someone to pull the trigger. The next week, Iris decided to turn the screw tighter, proving she could do whatever she darn well pleased, and invited her ex, Max, over, a straight-up jab, a flashy move to shove my boundaries right in my face. When I dragged myself through the door at 7:30 p.m., wiped out from another grueling shift, the scene in the kitchen hit me like a brick wall. Iris and Max, perched at the counter, sipping coffee and chatting like they were best buddies again. Max leaned back, all smooth charm and zero guilt, while Iris let out a flirty giggle at whatever he just said. My gut twisted into a knot. "What's going on here?" I asked, my voice low and taut, barely keeping the storm inside me from breaking loose. Iris flicked her hair back, flashing a playful smile, and chirped, "Oh, I just asked Max over for some coffee. We're catching up, you know, still pals and all." Max smirked, lounging there with his mug like he owned the joint, totally unfazed by the heat rolling off me in waves. To me, it wasn't just coffee. It was a blazing billboard shouting disrespect, a slick little stunt to shove me past my limit. My hands balled into fists, and I locked eyes with him, keeping my tone razor-sharp but steady. Max, you need to get out, right now. He arched an eyebrow, playing clueless, and drawled. Whoa, man, what's the big deal? Just having a little talk. He took a slow sip, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Iris jumped in, her voice all syrupy and smug. Come on, Christopher. Chill. We haven't even finished our drinks yet. That was it. My patience shattered. I marched over, snatched both mugs right out of their hands, and dumped the coffee down the sink with a splash. There, I said, slamming the cups onto the counter. Now you're done. Max's smirk flickered, then faded. He stood up, hands raised like he was surrendering, and let out a low, mocking chuckle. All right, I hear you. See you later, Iris. He strolled out, tossing a cheeky wink over his shoulder as the door clicked shut behind him. Iris stayed put, arms crossed, her smug look dialed up to max. The second Max was gone, I spun toward her, my voice exploding off the walls. What was that about? You think this is some kind of joke, inviting your ex here to flaunt it in my face? That's way over the line, Iris. She didn't even twitch, just stared back at me with this cool, defiant glare as our argument ignited, voices climbing higher, accusations zipping back and forth like wildfire. I let loose everything I'd been holding back for months, unloading all that bottled-up frustration, while Iris just brushed it off with shrugs and eye rolls, dodging every word I threw her way. Finally, when she saw my anger hitting its peak, she snatched her purse and jumped up, saying, You know what? I'm done with this. I'm heading out with the girls all night. You need to calm down, Christopher, because you're acting totally out of control. With a sly, victorious grin, she swept past me and out the door, leaving me in the kitchen, fists shaking, the empty mug still dripping into the sink like a sad little reminder. About 40 minutes after Iris bolted, I reached my breaking point, standing in that quiet house, the echoes of our blowout still bouncing around in my head. Something inside me just snapped. I'd had enough. I grabbed a duffel bag, crammed it with some clothes, my work boots, and a handful of necessities, then walked out the front door without so much as a glance back. The next morning, still groggy from a restless night in a cheap motel bed, I pulled out my phone and called the landlord. I want out of the lease, I said, my voice flat and firm. He stumbled over his words, clearly thrown off, sputtering. Hold up, what? You're serious? I didn't waver. Yeah, talk to Iris about it. She's the one sticking around. Let her deal with the rent. I hung up before his shocked pause could drag on too long. Meanwhile, Iris didn't crawl out of her friend's guest bed until 11:30 a.m., her head throbbing from a night of drinks and stubborn rebellion. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, yanking her awake. She squinted at the screen and saw a text from the landlord. Hey, Iris, we need to chat about the lease. Christopher's out. Can you swing by? My stomach sank like a rock. What? Hang on. Give me a minute to figure this out, she mumbled, ending the call. She scrambled into her clothes and sped back home, a gnawing dread creeping up her spine. When she burst through the door, the place felt off, too still, too hollow. My jacket wasn't hanging on the hook, my work bag was nowhere in sight, and a peek in the closet sealed it. My stuff was gone. He's just pitching a fit, she told herself, dialing my number. It rang and rang, no answer. She tried again, still nothing. A flicker of panic started chewing at her nerves. This wasn't some empty threat. Her fingers raced over her phone, blasting off a string of texts. Where are you? Come on, let's talk. You're blowing this way out of proportion. She paced the living room, waiting for a response, but her phone stayed dead quiet for what felt like an eternity. Then, at last, it pinged, one short, icy message from me. I'm done with a marriage where I'm disrespected, pushed, and turned into a joke. Iris stared at those words, her breath hitching in her throat. She sank onto the couch, the same one her friends had sprawled across days before, and the full weight of it all came crashing down on her like a ton of bricks. Iris had gone too far. Her little power trip had blown up in her face, and now she sat alone in a house that felt half empty, stuck with a lease she couldn't hope to pay on her own. That cocky shield she'd always carried? It was gone, swapped out for a jittery uncertainty that gnawed at her. What was she supposed to do now? The next day, she found herself in the landlord's cramped office, stomach churning as he pushed the lease papers across the desk. Those numbers glared up at her, Rent she couldn't swing solo, and though she fumbled through some shaky excuses, the truth hit hard. Without my paycheck, that house was a fantasy she couldn't keep alive. She walked out with a move-out deadline looming and a hollow ache in her chest. Meanwhile, I'd gone completely off the grid. No calls, no texts, just silence. Then one afternoon, her phone buzzed with an unknown number, and a crisp, no-nonsense voice cut through. "This is Christopher's attorney. I'm drafting divorce papers, and you'll get them soon." The call clicked off before she could even sputter a response. Divorce. That word landed like a smack across the face, and for the first time, a tiny fracture split through her tough girl act. Had she screwed up big time? Out of moves, Iris stuffed her bags and crashed at her friend's place, the same one she'd been partying with just nights before. The divorce rolled through fast. 10 days later, we sat in a cold, lifeless courtroom, scribbled a few signatures, and that was it. We didn't have much to divvy up, no big assets to bicker over, just a marriage that unraveled like some thrift store sweater coming apart at the seams. I settled into a small bachelor pad, a basic little spot with a worn-out couch and one lonely lamp. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. The sting of Iris's betrayal stuck around, this quiet hurt I couldn't quite shake off, but my buddies and coworkers stepped up, grabbing beers after shifts, tossing out low-key encouragement like, "You'll bounce back, man, fresh start ahead." I'd nod, wanting to buy into their optimism. Iris, though, she was scrambling to patch her life together, landing a tough gig, long hours, low cash, lugging boxes around a warehouse just to scrape by at her friend's place. Around her crew, she kept the show going, flipping her hair with a scoff, saying Christopher didn't deserve a catch like me anyway. But late at night, lying on that borrowed mattress, the real stuff crept in. She'd pushed the game too hard, overplayed her cards, and lost way more than she'd ever meant to. Staring up at the ceiling, it all sank in heavy. Iris finally owned up to it in her own head. She'd been a total fool. 5 months had rolled by, quiet and smooth for me. Christopher, I'd settled into my new groove, making a life in my simple little apartment and letting the resentment toward Iris drift into the background like a fading echo. Meanwhile, Iris had fought her way out of that warehouse slog, snagging a barista job at a snug downtown coffee shop, not exactly high-flying, but a heck of a lot better than lugging boxes. And the steady hum of the espresso machine gave her days a fresh sense of purpose. One chilly afternoon, the bell above the door tinkled, and I stepped inside, looking different, maybe more at ease, with a lightness in my stride that hadn't been there before. I walked up to the counter, eyeing the menu, and ordered 2 cappuccino to go. Iris froze behind the register, her hands fumbling with a cup as our eyes locked. Her usual swagger was nowhere to be found, replaced by a shaky glimmer of something softer. She wasn't the wild, untouchable Storm I used to know. "Hey," she said quietly, managing a small smile as she tapped in my order. "Didn't think I'd run into you here." She paused, then added, "You know, the past doesn't have to hang around forever." It was a cautious little peace offering, tinged with a hopeful edge. I held her gaze, my face calm but warm, and said, "Hey, Iris." I gave her a polite smile, then added, "Take care, all right?" I slid my card over, grabbed my coffees, and headed for the door. No bitterness, no leftover sting, just a simple farewell. I was moving forward, and it showed. Iris watched me leave, her chest tightening. She darted to the window on instinct, peeking out as I hit the sidewalk. There, under the awning, a woman waited, smiling easy and relaxed, reaching for one of the coffees with a laugh. 2 cappuccino, 2 people. The truth slammed into Iris like a shockwave, and a bitter twist of jealousy coiled in her stomach. She ducked back behind the counter, her thoughts spinning. "He's already got someone new that quick?" She fumed, her mind scolding me. How dare he move on like I was nothing? But as the espresso machine hissed, and the next customer stepped up, reality chewed at her. I wasn't the one clinging to yesterday, she was. That sharp little pang? It wasn't my doing, it was hers. After that coffee shop encounter, Iris couldn't shake the picture of me walking away, steady, happy, clearly done with her. It ate at her pride. She wasn't about to let me win this breakup. If I could move on, so could she. She'd find someone new, someone better, and show she didn't need me or anyone holding her back. After chewing over her choices, her mind landed on Max. Charming, familiar, maybe a chance to spark something real again. She started texting him, weaving in flirty little quips, nudging him to meet up. Max played along, agreeing to drinks or coffee, and for a bit, it felt like her scheme was falling into place. But something felt wrong. He'd chuckle at her lines, flash her a wink, yet kept her at a distance. No fire, no closeness, just buddy vibes. One night, after another laid-back hangout where he sidestepped her hints, Iris hit her limit. "Max, what's going on?" she blurted, hands on her hips. "I'm putting in all this work, and you're just treating me like a pal. I was hoping for more than that." Max leaned back in his chair, smirking like he'd seen this coming, and said, "Look, Iris, I'm not up for anything heavy with you." Then, with a smug chuckle, he added, I'm fine hanging out a bit if that's what you're after." It was a rude little jab, and it hit me harder than I expected. Her face burned. He wasn't serious. He was messing with her, dangling her hopes for his own fun. "You're unreal," she snapped, grabbing her bag. "Go enjoy yourself, Max." She stormed out, slamming the door on that daydream. Next, Iris dove into dating apps, dead set on finding someone, anyone, to plug the gap. She swiped through profiles, lined up dates, and threw herself into the hunt. But it was a mess. One guy droned on about conspiracy theories over chips and dip. Another rolled in late, reeking of bargain bin cologne, and tried to haggle over a $15 tab. She dragged herself through a few outings, each one a flop, and every time she trudged home, the sting of wasted time hit harder. For the first time, it sank in brutal and clear. Pulling in good guys wasn't the breeze it used to be. That realization knocked her flat. Her friends tried to lift her spirits, swapping stories of oddball dates and plenty of fish out there, but their cheer felt thin, like sticking a bandage on a busted leg. Alone with her thoughts, Iris kept circling back to me, Christopher. She'd blown it, tossed out a guy who'd been solid, kind, dependable, all the stuff she'd shrugged off. I'd been a lucky break she hadn't valued, and now, staring at her pile of letdowns, it was crystal clear finding another guy like me wouldn't be fast or easy. It might take years, or maybe it'd take fixing herself first. If you like this story, hit that subscribe button. I hope it leaves you in a great mood and wishing you all the best.